Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Frank About Health and the fourth installment of the Great Healthcare Disruption. As you see on your upper left or upper right, depending on which portion of Zoom you're looking at, you can see that this book is still on sale at Amazon.com. Please feel free during the hour to use the QR code right there. A lot of you have been doing it already on LinkedIn. I want to thank you all for that. And at the same time, I'm pleased to bring back Marschall Runge, who had been here during week one with Phyllis Quinlan. And I'm also pleased to bring back David Yang, who was here last week to cover the book in detail, because I've already read the book 4 times. And I was able at the same time to really go into not a debate, but a real full-length discussion about chapters 2, 4, and 6 last week. So tonight we have brought Marschall back because we understand from all you out there that you really learned a lot from what we discussed, but now you're going to get even more enhanced information from the author himself. So we had to do this show. There was no question. Simultaneously, we're going to add a special bonus, and that is the topic of CRISPR, a gene editing technology which can help a lot of individuals depending on their illness, depending on what part of stage of life they're in, but that's the best for last. So more on that later. I always issue a disclaimer on Frank About Health because obviously this is not a political show. I do not wish to bring up any political debate or anything that would be controversial in nature. I also don't want to violate HIPAA laws, so there's a lot of other reasons why we do not advocate specific issues that might affect someone personally. So that being said, these are not the views of talkradio.nyc or of Frank About Health, but they are the views mentioned in this very important book. So if there are things that you just don't agree with, you're obviously not going to buy the book. Therefore, all I can say is for everyone out there who has a lot to learn, who has already been learning and will learn even more today, I promise you that, you will find that this show is going to be as thoughtful and as real information presented to you as possible. And of course, it's open to debate. So feel free, if you're watching on LinkedIn, Twitch, Facebook, or YouTube, feel free to ask us questions live at any time during the hour. Marschall and myself and David are here to answer them as best as we can. But we all know that the person that will definitely get the information on point is Dr. Marschall Runge. David, I have not done you the service of fully talking about your background, and I know that I leave that just up to you to handle and manage as you see fit. But
Sure.
Everyone knows that you and I went to high school together. That was your introduction to Frank About Health. But simultaneously, they have begun to learn that you're also a very innovative medical technology expert. You worked with a company that I will leave nameless until you choose to mention it. And at the same time, you have years of experience and a PhD, I might add, from the Albert Einstein School of Medicine here in New York City.
No.
Okay.
So after Brooklyn Tech, I actually spent college. I went to Brooklyn College, but I wound up going to Emory University in Atlanta, and my PhD is in physical chemistry. It was funded by NASA. We were looking at the atmosphere of Titan. So completely different than I'm doing today. And it was very exciting. And I still wish I was doing that field, a little bit of astronomy, a little bit of gas phase kinetics. But what I wound up doing was applying some of the techniques that we used, specifically laser-induced fluorescence, for those studies for life sciences. So I moved to California and I started working on a company called Beckman Coulter. And we built a DNA sequencer based on laser-induced fluorescence technology back in the 90s. And back then, Marschall will get a kick out of this. One of our biggest achievements was we were able to sequence 500 bases at 98% accuracy in 2 hours.
Wow.
Yes. Now you can do that same thing in nanoseconds, in picoseconds. The rate of sequencing has gone up 10 orders, 15 orders of magnitude in my life, so that you can actually now sequence the whole genome in 2 hours rather than 500 bases. But back then, the state of the art was not what it is today.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. And anyway, so I worked with a company called Beckman Coulter. It was acquired by Danaher Corporation. And during the course of my career there, I was really building medical devices. And then towards the latter and part of the career there, I was looking at disruptive technologies, the great healthcare disruption. So one of my jobs, ironically, was figuring out how could we break our company. If someone was going to come in and take away our business, it's better for us to figure out what that is rather than somebody else, so that we can react to it. So I had actually a fun job.
That's
So I
also
was
a form of preventative medicine in a
no,
indirect
that's right.
speaking.
That's right. And
Nice.
and as we'll talk about it later, Danaher played a critical role in the recent CRISPR breakthrough that was actually in the news literally a week ago when I first hit the news. But the last thing I want to let people know is that I retired from Danaher on my 10,000th day. So I challenge anyone to plan your career to end on 10,000.0 days. There's a funny story around that and how I came to that, but it turns out that I was able to retire from that company at 10,000 days to do other things, really, because it's getting a little tired of being in the same place. So
Well,
that's what I had been doing. Yep.
forgive me, I don't know where Albert Einstein medicine came from. It's probably
No,
something I was reading in I looked up
I,
on Google and I got that as a search engine, so I apologize.
I'm not that smart. So I know a lot of people who went to Einstein. These are brilliant people. Yes. I just have a PhD. So, yes.
Awesome. So you're
Yeah.
also a doctor.
So I am a doctor, but as my daughter says, I'm not a real doctor. As opposed to Marshall, if someone has a heart attack, I think I know what to do, but I can't diagnose anything.
Well, David, your
Understood.
quote about looking forward with Danaher reminds me of that famous quote. I think it's about Smith Corona typewriters, that they perfected the perfect typewriter at about the time the PC came along. They weren't thinking ahead.
Yes.
You obviously were.
Yes. You got to think.
Incredible.
Yep.
Well, come to think of it, even from what the both of you just said, it kind of fits the title of this show. I think we were following up, David, on vaccines and pharmacies, and of course, introducing CRISPR. But I also did a subtitle, Disruptor, OR, or Disruptor, ER. And you can see that the introductions that are in itself show that, especially in the field of health and wellness, we end up naturally being disrupted by circumstances, life events. We all were disrupted by COVID, so forth and so on. So it becomes the mother of invention, necessity. While at the same time, and like I said, I think on the show we did with Phyllis Marshall, that healthcare is probably the most entrepreneurial profession that anyone can be in, whether it's a business orientation or whether it's just professionally in the way you think and the way you have to multitask and things like that. So disruption in health and wellness is actually a necessity. That's what I view. But more later on the show about the disruptor aspects of things, which of course this book is hoping or to help us mitigate. All right. So I think that was a 5-minute introduction to this show, but I think it was very fitting. It gave us a chance to meet David much more in depth. And of course, Marshall, you are a regular on Frank About Health at this point. So I'm looking forward to following up on the conversations that we had with David last week, and for him to ask additional questions that he probably didn't have the chance, that I know you could better qualify. And again, all of you out there, please get ready to ask us questions, because this book is very important and we want to do what we can to help drive traffic to Amazon, as well as all of us understanding how to manage the great healthcare. So that all being said, both of you, welcome to Frank About Health. And I guess, why don't we just start talking about vaccines? Because I think vaccines was where we left off last week, David.
Yeah. So, preventative care, as Marshall talked about in the book, is really should be a cornerstone, wellness care rather than reactive to a disease or some illness, that hits you. So
Right.
vaccinations have played a critical role in the past and should and will continue to play a critical role. And one of the things that Marshall, now, it's kind of funny, I'm speaking for Marshall because he's right here. But the mRNA, vaccinations are really is a game changer.
Yes.
Everything associated with mRNA is a game changer, because even during COVID, without the mRNA diagnostic tools, if you were relying on an immunoresponse and measuring immuno, we probably couldn't diagnose COVID definitively for many, many, many months. And similarly for the vaccinations, if we had relied on growing the antibodies to it.
Right.
And, yep.
I mean, that was in itself an interesting time. New York was the epicenter for the COVID pandemic here in the States. And all I could say is that those 5 months of lockdown were in itself traumatic, but at the same time, were probably my most innovative and creative. That's when I chose to come back to Frank About Health after being on the show on the network in 2016. But simultaneously, I found myself being a caregiver while also getting COVID and trying to incubate myself from being the transmitter to a recovering cancer patient, and not to mention two elderly parents. That it was a scary time. But the thing is when Operation Warp Speed took effect, I was like on a mission to make sure that everyone was getting their vaccine. I signed them all up, including myself. I even said, give me all my prerequisites because I'm not of their age yet, or they were going, from top down age category. But I made sure I got it when they got it because I was in the home doing caregiving. So to become almost like militant about it, if that's the right word to use, it just showed me that I had to be a fighter and a healthcare advocate, for myself as well as for my family and everyone else. But when we're all turned into those kind of robots just to fight for each day at a time, that kind of puts you on a mercy mission. And like you said, without any quick diagnosis or without the mRNA vaccine, we're all left to fend for ourselves continuously, and I think that's why I love this book so much, because even if we do face, God forbid, another pandemic, we at least have a manual to guide us into where to look and what it is we need to do. Wow, I can't believe it. 2 minutes to break. Is there anything else you were going to say about vaccines before we go to the break, and then we can continue on when we return?
I was going to defer to Marshall because I know he's got a lot to say.
Well, I'll make a less than 2 minute comment, Frank and
Okay.
David. Operation Warp Speed, which was largely directed by a fantastic person named Paul Mango, who unfortunately passed away. He was Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and HHS in the Trump administration. He had a background that led him to be able to bring together the forces to make this entirely novel approach to making vaccines. The technology was there, but it had never been actualized. And they did that in Operation Warp Speed, and it was transformative. And I think a lesson learned, as there's now talk about, well, should we use the conventional method of testing vaccines? We no longer have the conventional method of making vaccines. So we need to think about in the future, what's the appropriate approach to testing RNA vaccines? And they were highly efficacious worldwide in terms of COVID. And really much of that attributed to Operation Warp Speed.
Well, when we return, I want to continue upon what you said, because what I was interested in finding out is that mRNA was still going to be used to finding cures for things like we mentioned last week, David, HIV, AIDS, or even cancer. And I would hate to think that that in itself is going to be prevented going forward. So, ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned right here on Frank About Health as we continue with both Dr. Marschall Runge and David Yang, PhD, so that we could be able to advocate not only for our nation's healthcare, but our own healthcare. And remember, buy this book. I'm going to make sure you see the QR code during the commercial break, so there's no escaping this episode of Frank About Health without buying the book. That all being said, please stay tuned. We'll be back in a few.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Broncu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm sorry for the slight delay. I just saw a comment and I quote, "I got to save money for my move. I don't have a choice but to escape without buying the book." Thank you out there for whoever said that. But either way, again, this book is hot off the presses. Actually, if you don't mind a little self promo, Marshall, I think you had notified me that during the show that David and I did last week, that you noticed a spike on Amazon during the hour we were broadcasting. Oh, unmute first.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the goal is to have a book that is approachable and to people who are interested in healthcare. You don't have to be a healthcare expert to
Correct.
benefit. And this is, as Frank said to start with, the idea is to stimulate conversation around health in all of our communities and across the United States. And I hope it's successful doing that so that we can be healthier.
Exactly. And speaking about being healthier, you were talking there about vaccines, and I was talking with you about how I saw it as a disruptor, meaning something positive for finding cures for long considered fatal illnesses, especially the epidemic we went through in the 80s, David, the HIV/AIDS pandemic. What do you have to say, Marshall, about how mRNA may continue to thrive, which I'm hoping, considering all of the legislation that's being passed?
Oh, I think mRNA in terms of rapid development of vaccines, excuse me, is
Sure.
a real game changer. And for some illnesses that have been particularly resistant, like HIV, the development of a vaccines are inexpensive and are a great way to improve public health, not just in the United States, globally. So when you think about HIV, that has been a real difficult problem for scientists who are experts in that area. Yet, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert in that area, but I think HIV vaccination is much closer than it ever was before and is being studied.
Interesting. And then I guess what about cancer? I keep getting stuff from actually Mass Gen mRNA summits that they're doing up in Boston, trying to find mRNA vaccines for prostate cancer, liver cancer, stomach cancer. What can you say about that?
Yeah, I think the same thing. It's interesting. It was interesting to me that the idea of a vaccination against specific pathways for cancer, but that is becoming a reality. And you mentioned some common ones, prostate cancer, and another that is very resistant that people are looking for vaccines in is pancreatic cancer, because right now pancreatic cancer, unless it's
diagnosed.
unless it's caught incidentally looking for something else, it's almost impossible to cure cancer.
Yes. David, when you were talking about vaccinations last week, besides mRNA, was there something else that you were also saying needs to be understood about vaccinations, like maybe access, or was it in relation to how the pharmacies are taking over?
Yeah, so I think I was just generally touching on access to care, and all these subjects. Every sentence that I think is in Marshall's book really has a lot of different attitudes, different points of view that you can attach. But one of the biggest problems I think in the United States is equity and access to care, and vaccinations is something that I think has become distributed much better. I think that one of the rare successes in the retail medicine business has been the fact that you can get vaccinations at the CVS, that you don't need to make a special appointment at your, local, government healthcare, area, or go to your doctor, but you can actually go to CVS and get the get the vaccination. This is really true for rural areas where people aren't, necessarily can get to their doctor easily, but they have to go grocery shopping or whatever every week. So having
Right.
this distributed model for some things, I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, David, I think that's a great point, and I'm glad you brought
Yes.
it up. And a case in point, I mentioned before we started the show that I just had the most recent COVID vaccination that you can get um, last week, and I did it at CVS. I work for a big health system, but it's
Right.
so convenient. There's a CVS on my way home, and I just dropped in. 10 minutes later, I was done. I could
Yeah,
park up front. I didn't have to park in the deck and walk in. So
that's
uh,
right.
I think that is a really positive disruption. And we kind
Yes.
of learned that during the COVID pandemic. I don't know how it was where you lived, but here in central Michigan, we set up drive-throughs. It's like a drive-through McDonald's or a drive-through bank window. You could drive through, get your shot, took no time, drive on.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, here in
Yeah.
New York, it was such a tiered system. I remember it was Pfizer versus Moderna, and I think Moderna was through our Northwell Health system in New York, and then they brought Pfizer to the Mount Sinai Health system. And then I know NYU Langone, which is where all my primary care and specialists are, they were still testing. They were not interested in being a wide distributor until they saw the efficacy that was going on with both Moderna and Pfizer in those two other systems, with the exception of our public hospital system, H&H, or Health and Human Services, which would include Bellevue in Manhattan or Einstein in the Bronx, or I think even well, I don't know all of the hospitals in the five boroughs, but all I can say is that there was no real public um, vaccination schedule until the Javits Center opened up for
Hmm.
everybody. And that was like 6 months after the first vaccines rolled out. And then, like you said, both of you said, with the Aetnas, not the Aetnas, the CVSs of the world, the Dwayne Reeds of the world, the Walgreens of the world, they started taking over pretty much after we got to the Omicron variant. And now what I notice is that if I'm going to get a booster, like I was mentioning earlier, like in the case of my father, I have to go to those drugstores instead of the hospital systems. They now are all closed about it. And I think that I don't know if that has to do with the hospital management or if that has to do with whatever the state or federal systems are mandating. So
Yeah.
on one level, it is a positive disruption, but I think I'm worried about the potential for restriction. And that's what I'd like to hear on both your points of view on.
Yeah, I mean, I want to follow up on a comment that Marshall made about just the convenience of it. I think that we're reaching. I think the newer generation is expecting convenience. I once made a joke to some of my executives that if my daughter can buy boba drinks and get it delivered to our house in 30 minutes, why can't we do that with things that improve our life? Like vaccinations. Okay, this is far off, right? But maybe it's tomorrow. Medical testing, prescription drugs are being delivered a little bit more. So I think there's an expectation. And I also think that I envy Marshall's position because in my position at Danaher, we needed to talk to clinicians. One of the biggest problems any innovator makes is they solve a problem, they find a solution to something that's not a problem. And I think that winding through Marshall's book is his experience with clinicians who these are well-stated problems. And I'm going to digress a little bit again, but your whole chapter, Marshall, on emergency health records and removing the burden of writing, you hear that everywhere. Forget about the new drug. Just for a minute, forget about the new drug, the new test, decrease my paperwork so I can spend more time with patients. Absolutely right.
Yes. No, but then also what I'm finding is that, like you mentioned with the show with Phyllis, Marshall, that the doctors and the nurses, they're all aging out, and we have to reach to the middle school level and to the secondary school level to start getting people interested in becoming doctors and nurses and really repopulating the health profession. But if there is such a dearth, is that because there's just a lot of standback or pushback because of the pandemic? Or is it that people are being misguided, or are patients being forced to mandate their own care? What would you say is the big lever there that's creating such a fragmentation?
I think it's multifactorial. And I think that depending on who a young person talks to, they may hear, wow, I'm just drowning in paperwork, and why did I go into healthcare at all? And certainly there are people who feel that way, and it's hard to blame them. And as David mentioned, with some of the new AI technology, uh, I think that's going to help healthcare providers so much. And as I think we talked about before, Frank, but I can't remember for sure, I don't see any possibility that AI is going to replace healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, therapists,
No.
social workers, because that human contact is just something that AI cannot
Right. I mean, it's
do
good
right
to
now.
use while you're with your doctor. Like I've
Yep,
had to actually do that while discussing my father's PSA lab results. And when I saw a high number for a 94-year-old man, I thought that's okay. Versus if he was 64.
right.
So it's good for your own emotional support mechanism when you're getting news that is scary, but you still need to communicate to a human being. The human element of AI that is missing in healthcare is where it's a good disruption, especially to condense records, David, but it's not a good replacement for a medical professional. I think it helps you work with your medical professional like a colleague of sorts, rather
Yeah.
than feeling like, oh my God, what news are you going to tell me and what do I have to worry about?
And I think another thing we did talk about with Phyllis is the education. And we've gone away from health education, K through 12. And I think we must put that back in. People will be healthier if they understand children will be healthier. Children often bring things home to their parents. I remember in my era, classmates would go home and tell their parents to stop smoking because there was no ban on smoking. I'm a little older than both of you. And but I think that's a great positive. And in addition, I think exposing uh, children to healthcare in their education will recruit lots of people. We have an event once a year that's in the big house. That's where the University of Michigan football is played, the biggest football stadium in the United States.
Very
And
nice.
we bring in this year about 350 young people who are middle school. And we have booths set up. All of our departments set up booths so they can learn things from people in emergency medicine, learn things from physical therapy, and they are they represent a broad spectrum of people from broad economic backgrounds, some more disadvantaged, some not. And just to see those young people so engaged, they spend about half a day there. And if we do more of that, I am sure that we'll get a lot more people interested in some aspect of healthcare. They don't have to be one thing in particular. They may, in fact, the speaker was somebody who came from uh, living in a trailer park, a very poor background, first college graduate in his family, went through and is a fantastic physician. Now he wants to go into biotech, and he's going to be an entrepreneur. So,
Very nice.
and I thought that too was great to have these young people here. So broad horizons in healthcare. We just have to get the word out. And I think Phyllis was equally enthusiastic as I was about
Yes.
trying to reintroduce health into the curriculum for K through 12.
Well, we're about to take our next break, but I have a definite comment on that, which David, I know you and I can relate to. So when we return, I will share with everyone
Good.
what that comment is about, especially with reaching out to the younger set to get into the healthcare space. And then we will talk about the disruptor portion of the great healthcare disruption. So remember, buy the book, and we'll see you in a few.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time right here on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marsanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. To our engineer out there, no worries. We're in sync with each other. Everything is so far like clockwork. So again, like what Marshall, David, and I said, I hope your ear improves. But right now we're having an excellent conversation, and I wanted to comment, Marshall, on what you said about your event. First of all, I'd like to know when that is. Maybe I could come and actually see it. But second of all, Brooklyn Tech, where we graduated from, started a program. I mean, when we were there, we had limited majors, a lot of them engineering oriented, except he was a chemistry major. I ended up their second class of the Math Science Institute. And that same year, when I was in that class, they created the biomedical major. So they were starting to get on the cusp, or at least edge in to the life sciences as an engineering school. But today you can actually get as a major a concentration in pharmacological engineering and then end up with a PhD from I think it's Long Island University, which is up the block from the high school, in pharmacy management. And I don't know, David, do you know if they even have preparation for MDs or nursing degrees there, or do they go to another medical system from there?
Yeah, I think they used to have a pre-med program, but to be honest, I'm just not sure. I'm 2,500 miles away now in California.
True. I totally understand. Either way, I think Brooklyn Tech has definitely proven to remain on the cusp of innovation by welcoming the life sciences into their field of study for the secondary school prior to college. I mean, and those people end up, I mean, I was fortunate to go to NYU, and I know, David, like you said, you went to Brooklyn College. But today, a lot of people are going straight to Harvard Medical School, or they're going to Cornell Medical School and studying at Weill Cornell Health System here in New York. So it's definitely upped its, I don't want to say game, but it's upped its focus on using technology and engineering as a tool set, a skill set, a unique skill set to get involved in all of the necessary professions that we have today, especially health sciences, and medicine. So that all being said, I'd like to say that Brooklyn Tech is definitely a disruptor, a very positive one. But bringing us to our now third section about the disruptor. Without getting into politics and stuff like that, I'm sure you've seen in the media recent bills that have been passed by the House, as well as cutbacks that are slated for Medicaid and Medicare, and even the restrictions being placed on the COVID vaccine. Now, without getting, again, into the social issues surrounding it, what do you think the patients, the professionals are going to be potentially faced with? Are we going to see delays in all the research and testing that had been promised with things like mRNA vaccines? Are we going to see problems that we are unexpected? And better yet, are we open to a potential new pandemic? So I just give the floor for this section to you, Marshall, to really tell me what your points of view are on what's going on currently in our country.
Well, I'll start with the last part of your comment, Frank, and that is, are we going to see another pandemic? And we could. Who could have predicted COVID-19? Nobody. But as we become more globally connected, I think that we all, the United States and the world, runs the risk of transmitting something to a new area and having outbreaks. So I think we need to be prepared for that. I think we have the technology to be prepared for that.
Yes.
And I have to believe in my heart that if something like that should happen, just as it happened in COVID, despite the broad discussion on whether it's good or bad to have COVID-19 vaccines and therapies, I think those will again come to the surface. I also heard an interesting quote at a meeting, attended a meeting, and George W. Bush was the sort of guest speaker. And he talked about sort of the pendulum of sway of opinions from Washington, D.C., and that there's a pendulum. And it definitely goes one direction, another direction. We're seeing some of that happen today. And I think that my one hope is that the decisions that involve people's health can be influenced by by care providers who have been personally engaged. And
Yes.
for example, with COVID-19, our hospital wasn't as bad as New York, but we basically had to stop almost everything we did, and the hospital was almost full of COVID-19. And it wasn't just old people or frail people. It was people of every age, and it was just heartbreaking.
Yes.
And finally, when we developed some therapies, we had one very advanced therapy at Michigan Medicine, which is called ECMO. It's a way to basically support people whose blood pressure is so low they can't be supported otherwise.
Right.
And we had about a 30% save of people who almost 100% were destined to not survive. And so,
Wow.
did everybody live who was on ECMO? Well, no, but a third of them did. And I think that's an example of how we took a existing technology, used it in a new way. We weren't the only people to do it, but we had more capacity than most hospitals. So I'm giving, and I was here every day during the pandemic, not here at home. I was here in the hospital, and
Yes.
it's striking as a care provider. And so I think we need some of that input as people think about health decisions.
Amazing.
Yeah. If I can just add one thing, I mean, I can't agree more. We used to have a saying that if we were in the healthcare industry and we had a saying that if there was a carpet under your feet when you're making a decision, you're in the wrong place. The idea indirectly is that if you're making decisions about a clinical lab, about a doctor's office, you better get to a doctor's office and go see what they're doing, and to a clinical lab. What are the problems that clinicians actually see before you make a decision, so that you understand what the implications are and what the impact is? So I think these examples are exactly, I'm hoping that these decisions are based on consensus of, healthcare providers' comments, kind of an ensemble opinion on how to handle things, rather than simply based on dollar and cents.
Great quote.
Amazing. Amazing. It's very funny. You talk about ECMO, and I hate to point out into pop culture how I learned all about it, but I think it was during that time, and I'm an avid watcher of Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah.
Season 17, when Meredith Grey was going through COVID, and they kept talking about the testing to bring her out of her coma, remdesivir, you putting her on ECMO, giving her like IV treatments of whatever medication was available to boost her immune system. I mean, I thought that show was putting me in medical school, but via ABC.
Yeah, they were very current, extremely
They
current.
were. They were. That's probably why the show is still lasting after all of these years. But yet, the thing that I really hate is the idea that in order for people to reach out to the level of seriousness and understanding of that particular pandemic, or even any other kind of illness, is to actually engage in a TV program, rather than get it from our officials. So that communication gap is still what is distracting to me. I think that was more of the fuel that made me launch this podcast. I tell this all the time to my viewers. This was not going to be Frank About Health. This was going to be called the Cadre Report, all about COVID-19. I was going to do an entire podcast on COVID. And the irony is when it was ready to launch, all the mandates were lifted. So I thought, okay, go back to Frank about health. But here we are, kind of revisiting that whole notion, because you could see, as I'm mentioning, the disruption at this point is that lack of communication, misinformation, fragmentation of information, if any, like what Phyllis said, pulling down the information from the websites, what David has said, research funding cut, on needed things. And I hear it every day. And I got to be honest with you, I'm at a point feeling not scared, but vulnerable, because I've been spending the last 3 years while doing the show being a caregiver and an advocate for a cousin who's now in a nursing home. I actually got a call from the nursing home today. You're thinking, oh, is this the call where she passes? They said, we just want your permission to give her her COVID vaccine. I said, you've got it. Thank you for the call.
That's great.
But to live my life both virtually or even by watching the show and then living it in real time and not get the right source at the right time, that's still very disconcerting. So what would you say as we continue to get disruptive information? What can you tell the listeners and viewers out there how they can maintain their sense of calm and keep their thinking active? Because even if they're not the doctor, they can at least do their best to mitigate whatever the real issue is versus their fears.
I'm going to give a couple of suggestions.
Okay.
And, I think it is most difficult to follow healthcare in snippets, meaning, conventional news, because you just can't put it on a bumper sticker. But I'm going to give two specific suggestions. Sanjay Gupta, who most people know of, actually is a Michigan grad. He's a physician.
Nice.
He still does neurosurgery at Emory University, David, and he has podcasts. And his podcasts are both very informative, and they're cataloged through CNN. They're free if you're a CNN subscriber, and there are a bunch of them. And he delivers these in a way that is intelligible, but really grabs your attention. So that's one. There's a second, and so I'm referring to physicians who are providing healthcare advice. The second is another physician named Eric Topol, who's very well known, and he has a podcast called Ground Truths, and he talks about all kinds of difficult issues in healthcare, and he's much more on the sort of research side than Sanjay, but they're both great, and there probably are others, but those are two people that I happen to have met through my long career. And I think they do an exceptional job in topics that are of interest to all of us.
Very nice.
And they really reach people. So
it would be basically like what I've been telling everybody: continue to research on your own through watching podcasts, especially the ones you've been on. Well, not
of course.
This one, but some of the ones that I've actually seen prior to when you came to Frank About Health, and you were pretty much on point then. I think there was something that you did. I don't know if it was on Spotify or Apple, but it was very informative, and it helped me steer the show when we did the show with Phyllis. So if anything, I can already tell you a little hint that some of my future guests that are being slated for next week and beyond have already asked to meet you.
Oh, good.
So who knows, maybe when I have them come on Frank About Health and also still promote the book, you'll be on their show next, if it's doable, so more of that to follow. So before we go to our final break, everybody, what you've just heard from Marschall is the same advice that myself and David have been saying. When you are dealing with health information or misinformation, especially in a disruptive environment that we are in, go independently and seek out the information. If it's podcasts, fine. If it's particular websites, like Phyllis said, AARP, fine. If it's your own doctor, your PCP at whatever hospital system you're part of, then fine. Don't depend on mass media. Depend on your own instincts. Depend on ChatGPT, but definitely get, at the same time, a human to coordinate things with you so you can keep your mind focused and go through this firestorm together, which we're all doing. All right. We're about to take our final break. As you can see, Marschall and David, my device that was promoting the book actually burnt out. So at at this point, I hope everyone out there takes a look at this commercial break and quickly buy The Great Healthcare Disruption on Amazon. And if you're a Prime member, you will see it in your mailbox either by tomorrow or Tuesday. Remember, we're headed for Memorial Day weekend. That all being said, please stay tuned. We'll be back in a few.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Ready to serve up success with a splash? Hi, I'm Bruce Kramer, a.k.a. the Corporate Cockroach.
I'm the Renaissance woman, Angie Snowball.
And I'm your strategy doctor, Dr. Navtej Desange, inviting you to serving up success with a splash.
Join us as we shake things up with real talk and real strategies centered around awareness, action, and accountability.
And yes, there really is a cocktail involved. Please join us and sip your way to success.
Serving up success with a splash, where wisdom meets happy hours. Cheers!
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 You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to our final section of this episode of Frank About Health. We already talked about the disruptors and the disruptors, but now we're going to talk about a very important innovation that is very important for all of us to be aware of and to determine if we are eligible, how we can finance it. So that all being said, David, this is your section. I want you and Marshall to completely spend the next 13 minutes talking about that invention that your company was very instrumental in launching. So go ahead.
So I will start again. I'm not the MD, so Marshall will correct all of my MD incorrectness. But everyone's been talking about CRISPR. CRISPR won the Nobel Prize as a gene editing tool. CRISPR was around even before then as a failed diagnostic tool. I won't get into the reasons why it failed, but it's been reimagined. And I have all these quotes from Marshall's book that I wanted to read, but this one I am going to read. Throughout the writing of this book, Marshall writes, I've been bumping up against the challenge of evolutions happening so rapidly that before I can even detail my expectations for where we'll be 6 months, a year, or 5 years from now, new drugs surface and new technologies emerge, and prediction all too quickly becomes reality. So absolutely, things are happening faster than we expect. I actually thought CRISPR technology would start impacting people in about 15 years because in general, that's what it takes to get the infrastructure, the whole, it's not just the discovery, but it's making sure that the discovery is safe for the patient. So this time last week, a report in the New England Journal of Medicine outlined basically a cure using gene editing that occurs within the patient's body. So this was an infant less than 1 year old who had a genetic disorder whose lifespan was probably in months, if not 1 or 2 years. And my former company, Danaher, some of their operating companies, what they did was they actually put in the infrastructure to manufacture the drug for the patient. Okay, so it's great to have an idea on paper on what it is that will cure the patient, but to actually manufacture it to the quality that's necessary to prevent you from inadvertently causing more harm to the patient is unheard of. So this is a one-off drug. It's really to treat one patient, but I think Marshall is going to talk about this more, but this is really the beginning of personalized healthcare. Now, what they did now is not sustainable, but the first airplane was not sustainable, right? The first anything is not sustainable, but going from 0 to 1 is an infinitely difficult challenge. Going from 1 to a billion, that's easy compared to a 0 to 1. So Aldebaran, IDT, the Danaher Diagnostics, my former colleagues, they put together a triage team that was able to manufacture. So now there's a guideline, there's a roadmap on how to do it once. Next time will be better. Third time will be better and cheaper. Fourth time will be yada, yada, yada. So this is, again, an example of a disruptor that has the promise to change people's lives. Marshall, I know you're chomping at the bit to say something.
Oh, I agree with everything you've said, David. And you made a comment earlier about a technology that you had been instrumental in developing that enabled the possibility of sequencing 500 nucleotides in 2 hours. And that was a huge step forward. But within years, and at this point, the entire human genome can be sequenced. And when the human genome was first sequenced back in about 2000, I couldn't have ever imagined that we'd be at a point where we could make specific changes in it that would enable a person with a severe genetic disease to live a normal life. So it's and CRISPR was being studied back, 15 years ago, as you said, this technology for gene editing. So I think it's enormously exciting. And I do agree. I think the cost of sequencing the human genome the first time around 2000 was $3 billion. Now, if you go to your favorite hospital or health system, you can get your entire genome sequenced for about $250. I mean, 3 billion to 250.
That's right.
Yes.
And
in a day rather than in 15 years.
Right. And with AI now to understand, to look at that entire genome and say, hey, you've got a mutation that could be fixed and could really dramatically change your life. Who could have imagined it? We live in such an exciting era, and I hope that we'll continue to develop these advances. I mean, it's just mind-boggling.
What does the acronym CRISPR stand for?
Oh my!
Take it away, David.
I don't know, but I know how to get the answer.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I mean, if anything, when I had heard about it the first time, it was a couple years ago. I guess it was still in its infancy. And when I heard about CRISPR, I heard about it as aligned with neurological disease like epilepsy, autism, strokes, things like that. But obviously, from what I'm hearing, it's genetic sequencing for illnesses that are caused by genetic mutations, I presume. So
clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats. I know what the individual words mean, but I don't. So they must be looking at sequences of DNA that are fairly large that the enzyme can recognize that are repeating. So, but I'm not an expert.
No, I looked it up the same time you were, David. I'm not sure that the full name of it helps anybody. Doesn't help me.
Right. That's right.
But if anything, does that mean that it becomes the family of solutions like is mRNA?
Yes. Absolutely. And to develop the first mRNA vaccine took a decade or more. Regeneron was working on that more than a decade before COVID hit.
That's right.
Wow.
Technology. And one thing. Sorry, go ahead, Marco.
Oh, I was just going to say the technology was there, and I think we will see much more of that rapid evolution from technology being there. And as I think you all know, the Nobel Prize was given for this CRISPR innovation just a few years ago.
2020. Yeah. And one thing I kind of want to point out is, none of these things stand alone. There's only one paper that I've ever read that had no references, which was an Einstein paper. But all of these things are based on something else. So even in this CRISPR, the CRISPR is actually important. They had to do next-gen sequencing to find the mutation in this patient.
Yeah.
And it's a single point mutation. They had to develop mRNA as a guide for the CRISPR. So I'm sure there's AI involved. So it's an ensemble of things that help. It's the CRISPR part is the new part, which gets everyone excited. So your tool chest has a new, screwdriver, a new hammer that can beat down disease. But sorry.
No, this is excellent, because then with AI, it'll make whatever warp speed we were in 2020 exponential and probably even more cost effective. Like
Yes.
you were talking about how it went down to $250. That must be because of the volume participation of diseases as well as patients that were looking for the solutions. And you also mentioned about how drugs were manufactured using CRISPR technology. So actually, that's another echo of patient-centered care. So I can see that CRISPR is definitely probably going to be something that's an innovation that will help mitigate the disruptor part of our conversation. There's hope in it, even with what's been being passed in Congress, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that this will make investigators who are studying these areas, they'll have to be more innovative to look at other sources of funding. But this is coming along at a time when, for many decades, the backbone of big pharma and a lot of innovation industries has been scientists like David, who trained and then entered an entrepreneurial field. And so we'll have to figure out how to do that in a different way. Things
Wow.
change and you adapt.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I can't believe the show is 1 minute to end. So I'm going to say for all of you out there, please buy this book, The Great Healthcare Disruption. I don't have the QR code anymore for this particular episode. It's Amazon.com. Search Marschall Runge. Search the name of the book. Obviously, CRISPR is the big takeaway from this particular episode. And I hate to say this, Marshall, but this is the last of our 4 episodes together. But I will have you back. I promise that. I also thank you, David, for literally bringing me back from a slump when we paid tribute to our alma mater, and then also reading this book with such vigilance and helping me mitigate through it last week as Marshall was being disrupted, but appropriately so. But at the same time, there's just so much follow-up. So ladies and gentlemen, before we go to our next show that starts at 6 o'clock, Success with a Splash, right here on talkradio.nyc, I want you all to reach out to me at frankrharrison1@gmail.com. I will give you Marschall Runge's contact information if you have any direct questions for him. And David, would you like to share your email, or would you like me to tell people to go to it?
Sure. It's just davidlyang@icloud.com. I'm currently unemployed, so I'm using my own personal email. But davidlyang@icloud.com for what it's worth.
And Marshall, I'm going to use Frank About Health to get the word out there on every episode going forward. At the same time, I think, David, you and I should be talking about how we talk at the next STEM committee meeting about this. I think it's something that they're all going to want to know more information about. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying tuned the last 4 weeks as we've been on the great healthcare disruption bandwagon. We will be back on my 4th anniversary show next Thursday. And I have a special guest, a referral from the A Train to Sedona. And he is also interested in meeting Marshall. So this will continue indirectly. But and again, Marshall, we will have you back before you leave your wonderful job next month.
Well, thanks, and great to see both you and David today. Great session.
All righty. So thank you, Jesse, behind the scenes. I hope everything feels better for you. Get ready for the next show, and I will call you both in a few minutes. All right. Thanks for signing off. See you soon. Bye-bye.